Oops, sorry.
Test. Thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight. We had a great debate. If you saw it, Ron knocked them on their heels tonight. I'm going to keep this very short. I am the chairman in Nevada for the campaign. We welcome you all out. We hope you come back and volunteer for us to help make this man our next president. I'd like to introduce Congressman Ron Paul.
I want to introduce my family. I have a few members of my family. We have a large family, but they didn't all come tonight. My wife is back here, Carol. My oldest son, Ronnie, and his wife, Peggy. But thank you all for coming out. We did have a little debate down the road there a little bit, and I think I got a fair shake on the time tonight. What do you think? I think that the message of liberty is what has to be delivered. The principle of liberty was well understood by the founding fathers. They did their best on the Constitution. The people came up short, and the Constitution came up short. And we don't have much of a Constitution right now because we have a lawless nation. The federal government does pretty much what they want. The Congress is derelict, and they don't assume responsibilities that they should have. They do the things that they shouldn't be doing. Courts, they end up writing laws, and they're not supposed to write laws. But what about the executive branch? You know, the one thing about wanting to be president isn't to be running your life and running the economy and running the world. But Congress too often has been derelict in delivering too much power to the executive branch. For instance, that we have, as a Congress and as a people, for that matter, have allowed on their decision. The Constitution is explicit. The president is very, very cautious about going to war, and if you have to, you go in and you win, and you don't drag them out for 10 years. I didn't get a chance to mention this tonight in the debate, but there was a statistic that came out. Some of you may have seen that. I think it just came out today. It had to do with somebody summarizing the donations from the various campaigns. And I think most of you know that our campaign gets more money from the active military than all the rest put together. Matter of fact, twice as much as the rest of them put together. But that one individual who's considered out in front and leading all the polls, and he was in the center of the stage, they listed his where he got his donations, and the first top three were three different banking institutions.
Of course. Herman Cain.
No, it wasn't Herman Cain. He's an insider at the Fed. He knows a different way. Just kidding, of course. But you know, to further fortify what I was saying, they listed all three of our donation, the different groups. And the first one was the U.S. Air Force. The second was the U.S. Army, and the third was the U.S. Navy. Really a positive sign. You know, tonight they ask about, what do you run? You want to cut all our defense fund. Of course we don't want to cut any defense. We want to cut the military that is not doing us much good. But when we know the troops are on our side, we know we're on the right track. But I think we're on the right track because we defend liberty. Liberty to me is the important issue. All political action, from my viewpoint, should be for the promotion and the understanding of what individual liberty is about. And this is what made America great. People operate today, and you hear it on the stage about American exceptionalism. We are so great and good, and we are going to tell other people who now have more money than we do. They have $3-4 trillion in the bank, and we owe all that overseas plus our national debt. So I would say we're on a wrong track and a wrong policy, whether it's foreign policy or monetary policy or economic policy, and we can defend that by fully understanding what a society is like if we believe in individual liberty. It means that you and I and everybody has a responsibility for ourselves. That means you have a right to your life because it's natural to you. It's a God-given right to life. It's a God-given right to your liberty. And therefore, you should have a right to keep what you earn.
Yeah!
But if we look at that, a lot of people will say, this can't work. Can't work. That means anarchy. The government's there. You're just going to get rid of all the government. Well, we can get rid of a bunch of it and still not even approach anarchy, let me tell you. But there is a role for government, and it's supposed to enforce contracts. That's an important thing. Most of the time that can be done locally. But governments, nationally and domestically, are always interfering with our contracts, interfering and tell us what we can do and what we can't do. They're interfering with wage contracts and all the regulatory that we have to go through. But we have to realize that the principle of private property and contract and sound money. So the Constitution was very clear. You can't counterfeit money. So if we're not allowed to counterfeit money, why are we allowing the federal government through the Federal Reserve counterfeiting money? They shouldn't be allowed to do it either.
Right. And the Fed! And the Fed! And the Fed!
So if you take those basic principles and apply them to economic policy, the conservatives are going to agree with us. Yes, we'd like to be more left alone, lower taxes, less regulations, unless a big company likes it or unless somebody needs bailed out and they have too many exceptions. But if you take that same principle and a conservative understands this, why can't we apply this to all interpersonal relationship? We apply it to religious values and intellectual matters. Religious life, stay out of our intellectual life. Why don't we tell the government, if the government doesn't have a right to tell us what we can read and write, and the government doesn't have a right to tell us what church to go to, why have we assumed for so many years that the government has a right to tell us what we can do with our own bodies?
Yeah. And the drug war! And Homeland Security.
So we have these wars overseas that we talk about a whole lot and why we should suspend them or get rid of them and bring the troops home. But yes, there's a war here. There's a war in this country against our liberties, whether it's by the TSA agents or the DEA agents. And there's a war on drugs that has not done us a bit of good. All it has done is undermine our personal liberties. But because we have been careless and we live with little respect for the Constitution, we have allowed our government to take upon themselves such things as total control of our educational system through the Department of Education. And people, are almost shocked. You'd get rid of the Department of Education? Yeah, I'd get rid of the Department of Education.
Immediately.
It might improve education. That's what it might do. But also, just as we had a huge bubble along with the easy inflation and all the rules about making easy loans to people who don't qualify and get us into a housing bubble, just think how there's $1 trillion owned by our students. Our students are graduating right now. They owe $1 trillion. The education is of less quality, and there are no jobs available to them. So it's a total failure, and they did this without amending the Constitution. They just said, we'll go ahead and do this. Back in the old days when they decided, alcohol was so bad and we had to regulate personal behavior, they still thought a little bit about the Constitution. They amended the Constitution. But today, whether it's the executive branch or whether it's the courts or whether it's the Congress, they just totally ignore it. So the rule of law has been laid bare. Now we live and we put up with, and there's not a whole lot of resistance. I guess against some of these things that are happening. I mean, we have become a nation that accepts the idea that, yeah, you can torture people, they're bad people. Yeah, you can assassinate an American because he's obviously a bad person, and therefore we can take care of him. I mean, this is up to us to change this, because there's a lot of other people who disagree with us on that. But to tell you one thing, you know, when I spoke out against the assassination, you know, most of the first day or two, you know, it was mostly criticism toward our position on this. But you know, about the end of the week or 10 days or so, all of a sudden the attitudes were changing, and some that were on radio talk shows that were considered ultra conservative and would never change their mind, they actually changed their mind on that. So I see this as an intellectual fight. We have to change people's minds, because one individual being in Washington, even with the best intention, can't do it. You have to change people's attitudes. We have to change people's minds about what the role of government ought to be. And in our system, it was meant that the role of government should be very small. It was also meant that the Constitution, if you obeyed it, was mostly written to restrain the federal government. It was never written to restrain us in any way.
Right. Yeah.
And if we were to have the necessity of law enforcement for violence and fraud and theft, it was supposed to be at the local level. We have now over 100,000 federal bureaucrats who investigate just about everything that we do, and they all carry guns. You know, I have a lot of respect for the Second Amendment, and I think the Second Amendment gives us a lot of protection. But let me tell you, I think we should have a lot more gun control on these bureaucrats coming out of Washington, D.C. We do face a lot of problems. I think the freedom movement is growing by leaps and bounds. There's a dramatic difference between now and 4 years ago. I think the crisis that we got into financially, as well as these prolongations of the wars, has changed the attitude of a lot of people. And also the educational activities that have been going on, the study of free market Austrian economics, it's been around for a while. It didn't just start 3 years ago, but it seemed to come alive about 3 or 4 years ago, and it's continuing to grow. But this is very, very healthy. When the Depression came in the 1930s, everybody was still talking about free markets and gold standards, and even Roosevelt ran on a balanced budget and a gold standard and limited government. Yet the intellectual community was completely opposite. They were all moving in. The Keynesians moved in, and they took over. And it climaxed in 1971 when Nixon announced, we're all Keynesians now. We need to continue our movement, because we're approaching the day where we'll be able to stand up and say, we're all free market people today, and we believe in liberty. Thank you very much.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Hey, man. Some shots. I will. I really need shots of him. Okay, I think we're going to move on.
Okay.
Good to see everybody.